adjustment involved with this property to create this parcel directly to the southeast, where Mr. Hermansky upgraded this old heritage, not designated, but a house on the Heritage Register. With that boundary adjustment, there was no servicing requirements triggered by the servicing bylaw. Earlier this year, the owners applied to subdivide one lot, and I'll show you that where the proposed subdivision is on a latter page. But the one lot subdivision earlier this year triggered a whole bunch of requirements of the servicing bylaw, including upgrading Lakeshore Road to the urban collector standard, half the road, and upgrading 16th Street Northeast to the local urban standard. And the portion to be upgraded would be where the hand is here to here, which is approximately 33 meters in length of frontage. As well, there's a water main that traverses from east to west down slope to Lakeshore Road, and that water main is 100 millimeters in diameter, and the servicing bylaw requires an upgrade to 150 millimeters. And also there is a storm sewer main right here at the corner of 15th and 16th. And to extend that main according to what the bylaw requires would be about a 30-meter extension. So the original variance application filed back in midsummer was to basically waive the requirement to extend the storm main, waive the requirement to upgrade Lakeshore Road, and contribute a 50% cash contribution for works along 15th and 16th. We met with the applicant and the owners back in, I believe it was August, and we discussed some of the servicing requirements and some of the issues along Lakeshore Road, which are addressed in a report later in your report, item 6.1, regarding the geotechnical stability of Lakeshore Road and how there's some issues there. And one of the things that staff were trying to negotiate with the owners was a 10-meter wide road reserve covenant in the event that the city ever needs to widen out Lakeshore Road, which could be a very real possibility in the future. The owners were not interested in that. So we went back and forth again, and then there was a revised application with the subdivision to create 2 lots instead of 1, shown as parcels A and B on the sketch plan. And I guess at the end of the day, staff support what the applicants are requesting for a variance, with exception to the storm sewer main. Staff believe the storm sewer main should be extended as required by the bylaw, and we are agreeable to the covenant that the owners are willing to register on the property, which would prohibit further subdivision or access onto the remainder lot from Lakeshore Road in the future.
Okay. Would the applicant like to come up and speak and tell us about your proposal?
Not sure if this is on. Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. My name is Nicole Bird. I'm a land surveyor with Brown Johnson Land Surveyors. I think what we just like to say about this application and the one variance that staff isn't supporting is this storm sewer main is on the far side of the road compared to the proposed 2 lots. And these lots wouldn't be able to connect into this service. It's not something that they can use. They're proposing to deal with their stormwater on site. So we just feel that this requirement is onerous for the development proposed.
Okay. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship. Thank you. How would you deal with it on site then? You don't have to give the exact plans, but what do you propose?
I think what we would be looking at is drainage pits on site.
Okay. maybe we'll get staff's comments on that later.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
We'll talk to them later then. Do we have any further questions for the applicant? Okay. Hearing none, then go ahead and have a seat.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you. So then to development services or engineering, do you have any comments then on dealing with their storm sewer on site?
Your Worship, the extension of the storm sewer on 15th and 16th would essentially service the road frontage developments, so for catch basins and whatnot along that section that needs to be upgraded. Kevin, you can show that on the plan there. So essentially that area there. And again, if it isn't done during this development, then it falls on the taxpayer's responsibility to pay for it later.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions then for staff? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. A question for staff and then perhaps for the applicant as well. So it looks like through the report, what we're really talking about is just the storm drain work on the east side of 16th, which is an $8,000 item. Through you to staff, the work is on the opposite side of the road of the development. So often, and you can correct me on this, often the developers are responsible for their half of the road, not for the other half. Does that apply to storm drainage as well, or is or when the storm drains on the other side of the road, they're still responsible?
Engineering?
Your Worship, typically the curb and gutter and the fronting side is the responsibility of the developer, but any underground works, storm sewer, water, sanitary extensions are all still part of that development and still a responsibility of the development.
Okay. The property that's, I think it's 1490, beside 1490, when that develops, or if that subdivides, would they need to do that storm drainage on their side of the road?
Your Worship, this property was under subdivision application recently, and because of its size, it was exempt from the works and services requirements of the bylaw.
Okay, so they subdivided but didn't have to do the storm drain because of the size of the lot.
That's correct. They had to do an on-site stormwater system.
Okay, like the one we're talking about now. All right, could I perhaps ask the applicant a question now?
Certainly. Would you like to come forward?
It's Nicole, right?
Yeah, it is.
Nicole, we couldn't let you off with no questions. My question, and perhaps it's for the GOMS, I'm not sure. It looks like you've done a good job of working with staff, and I know you've had to work through lots of items, and so we're down to what's an $8,000 item now. Is there an opportunity to cost share the item? And I'm thinking often will 50% an item such as this, which would mean $4,000 probably each. So I'd like to get a feeling from the applicant whether that would be something that they would entertain.
Sure. It's something we have discussed in the past. We haven't talked about it recently, but I probably would defer to the owners on that one.
Fair enough.
Good morning, Your Worship, councillors. Hello.
Good
morning.
Give us your name. I know we know it.
It's
but for the
Norma Jean
recordings.
Gom, and this is my husband, Graham Gom. So your question was whether we would be open, or have we discussed cost sharing of the storm sewer?
Yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
that's, if we're talking about an $8,000 item holding up this project, whether 50% of that item from you and 50% from the city would be something you'd entertain.
Well, I guess just to back up a little bit, part of the discussion with staff around the variances was not only did we offer to put a covenant for no further development on the remaining property, but we also said we would pay 100% of the frontage costs on our side of the road. So it went from 50% to 100%. So my response is that hasn't been discussed here, so I'd like that to be taken into consideration. And we feel that if we're bearing 100% of the costs on our side of the road, that perhaps it makes sense to not have to pay for the storm sewer extension on the other side.
I understand. You're aware that the bylaw requires you to pay 100% of what's on your side of the road?
That's true.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's fair enough answer, and we can take that under consideration here.
And I'm happy to come back to
Thank
Mike.
you.
Thank you.
Those are my questions for now, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. And thank you for the tour of the site and a beautiful piece of property. I didn't even really know that little street behind existed. So I do have a question with regards to the discussion of a covenant. I don't see it in the motion. Did I miss it?
It is in the motion, Your Worship.
So where,
Subject to,
did I miss that? What is mine? Oh, there we go, registration. So the covenant is there. We have a cost estimate for everything that the developer, and I know they're not professional developers, but technically developers, is asking to be varied. Do we have a cost estimate for what they are paying for the amount that was just discussed, 100% of the curbside and things like that?
Your Worship, on page 4 of your report, or sorry, it's page 2, page 4 of the agenda.
give the whole breakdown.
Is that everything that they're paying, or is that everything that we're waiving?
Those are cost estimates for the requirements of the bylaw and the subdivision.
Right.
I just want to clarify too that with the storm sewer main, that's a cost estimate to do the work. There is actually, and this came to my attention last week, that the city engineer would prefer to see the storm main actually physically extended, which according to the estimate should be that cost. So I want to clarify that as well.
Well, maybe I didn't phrase my question properly. This says that staff, approximately $141,000. The upgrades to east half of Lakeshore staff is supporting that variance, correct?
Because of the covenant, yes.
Okay, and the upgrades to the water main, you're supporting that?
Yep.
And you're supporting the $30,000 for the upgrades to the west half?
They are offering to do the west half of 16th Street.
Okay, so that answers my question. So that $30,000 is what they are offering to pay, and what we're really talking about, that's the only difference between what they're asking and staff, is the $8,300. Okay, I just wasn't sure if there was other costs that they are paying over and above that 30. So really, we're discussing $141,000 in total, of which staff is supporting $100,000 variance. The client or the applicant is going to pay 30, and it's really the 8350 that we're really making a decision on.
And that decision for that cost of 8350 is based on an estimate.
Okay. Thank you. I now understand this better, and I will listen to what others have to say before I make a decision.
Thank you. Do we have anything further from council? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to get clarification after hearing from Development Services. I didn't understand the comment about the extension of the storm. Is that a different? Like, are you saying that it's going to cost more than $8,000? I guess that's what my question is, or we don't know.
Engineering?
Through your worship, cost estimates when you actually get to the construction can vary. I think what Mr. Pearson's comment was is sometimes we would take cash in lieu if we didn't feel that the works were warranted at this exact time, whereas as we'll speak to later in this meeting, the storm upgrades are we feel at this time pretty pertinent, so we would like to see them done rather than a cash in lieu.
Okay, I understand. So what we're saying is that storm work needs to be done now, not not in the future. Okay, I understand. I think in addition to Councillor Flynn's comments, we know that a small lot subdivision is expensive, and of course we're all working to try to make it affordable. And the 30,000 that the GOMs are spending on the west side of 16th is only a part of the amount. We know the DCC amount is about 20,000 as well. So we have to consider that when making a decision on whether it's affordable or not, because we don't want to tip it such that it's not affordable to do, because I'm sure this is something that all of us would like to see, but at the same time we want to make it fair. So I think that's what we're wrestling with. Thank you.
Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. So just for clarification through you to staff, the property across the street where that is under subdivision would not have to pay those fees because of the size of the property?
Yes, the servicing bylaw has an exemption, and if the property is at a certain size and cannot handle more than 2 additional lots, which applies to this property, qualifies for the infill exemption.
I see. But the net outcome in both cases is 1 additional home, is that right?
For this property across the street, it's a 1-lot subdivision, so 1 additional home.
And is the subject property, is a 2-lot subdivision?
Yes, proposed lots A and B.
Right. And so I do understand from the developer's perspective that they're doing the same thing as the neighbor across the street, but expected to pay more when the outcome is in fact the same, except for the size of the property.
However, Your Worship, if you look at the area of the 2 proposed lots, they are certainly large enough for more than 2 lots.
I see, but the covenant would keep it to 2 lots.
Well, the covenant's really for the remainder here.
I see. Okay. All right. Yeah. So it is a dilemma. But if I think about the net outcome, I'm tempted to side with the developer, and I feel comfortable moving it forward to see what the neighborhood has to say. But there certainly is an expectation that we resolve this in a manner that is suitable to all parties.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Thanks again, Your Worship. Councillor Wallace Richmond actually alluded to it, so I guess through you to planning. So the 2 lots that are created in this subdivision then could be subdivided again? Are they large enough for subdivision?
Lot A is 1,075 square meters, and Lot B is 1,085 square meters. So yes, there is further subdivision potential.
Okay. They would create rather small lots, and that one building is coming down on Lot A, correct?
The garage.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. And I'm quite interested in a drainage plan, and I didn't really. I heard that the applicants are interested, and I also heard that the city, Your Worship, is, I guess, interested. But really, we're looking for a way to make sure that that's extended, the storm sewer. So the storm sewer only needs to be extended, excuse me, if the applicants hook up. Is that correct?
No, Your Worship, it's a requirement of the bylaw to extend the storm sewer and the frontage. The bylaw also allows for alternative storm sewer drainage plan, so essentially that's what the GOMs will be doing on the sites. And the storm sewer and the road is required for the road.
Okay, because there'll be curb and gutter.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. I know in other properties, Your Worship, we have considered drainage plans that have alleviated the cost of hookup, but because it's a requirement of the bylaw, that's really what makes it difficult, I guess. Mm-hmm. Okay, good, thank you.
Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. Now that I think I understand the issues, I personally will support the additional $83.50 being waived. It's interesting because I did tour the property and did get a tour of the single lot that didn't do any upgrades. And I guess my philosophy has always been at this table that we need to infill. We have an extremely difficult community to infill in because of topography, and this lot is a perfect example. And we built an infill exemption into our bylaw in order to allow single lots like the one across the road to be developed at a reasonable cost. The fact that our infill exemption allows that, I'm not sure that that makes it reasonable that this development has to pay that $8,300. I would be willing to look at 50-50 if that's what somebody brought forward, but if I had to choose between making the applicant pay the $8,300 because the other lot could be done based on the infill exemption or the taxpayer picking it up, I think based on our infill exemption, I would support waiving the $8,300. So I guess I don't support the motion as it's presented here because it doesn't waive that requirement, does? Oh, it does. So I do support the motion as worded. And sorry, staff, I understand your reasons for the staff recommendation, but to me, the $8,300 is a reasonable cost to the taxpayers to have this infill occur.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to ask a question totally unrelated to what we've been talking about. The access egress on these two lots, do they have separate driveways onto 16th, or is it going to be a one driveway?
Your Worship, that hasn't been determined yet. The subdivision plan was only recently amended to include proposed Lot B.
Okay. Could I ask the developer what their plan is?
Worship.
It's a joy calling you a developer.
Yeah,
Frank.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I've been trying to stay away from this. Yeah. I was just talking to Nicole, and there is room for two accesses, but I will tell you that that Lot A and the one beside, owned by Mr. Hermansky, we do. I mean, we could give you a whole history of this, and I think we've already given it to some councillors who visited the site, but A is basically something that Sonny and Gary Brook would like to purchase, and they were the ones that precipitated this whole development, to be honest. And I mean, we are benefiting definitely, but they have been in talks with Mr. Hermansky, if they purchased the lot, that they would have one access to the two lots. They'd have to go through the city, obviously, for that, but they know that that's something that is something that would be, you know, probably in the benefit of the city and the two lots there. B, we wouldn't know, and we have no plans right now for B, to be honest. So.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that information. That helps me too. So I appreciate the comments from fellow councillors, and I agree with Councillor Walsh-Richmond and Councillor Flynn. I think we need to do the reasonable thing here, and what I see as being the fair thing, which is to support the motion as stands, and totally understand staff has to follow the bylaw with their recommendations, so I understand that. But I think the fact that they're looking after their own storm water on their side of the road, that they couldn't hook up to the storm drain on the other side because it's on the other side of the road, the fact that the neighboring properties have subdivided and not had to contribute are all factors that that make this decision a little easier for me. Also, the access egress, I think, is a small but important piece to it. So I will support the motion as stated, which would be to waive the cost of the storm drain on the west side of the road.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, and the last thing I did want to add, as I stated already, I will vote in support and agree with Councillor Harrison's comments and Councillor Walsh-Richmond's. The last thing I will mention is because of the covenant, and I know, having toured the property and had a discussion with the GOMS, that it's not going to happen anytime soon, but when that piece with the covenant ever does get developed, we have a significant opportunity for the taxpayers of the community to get the road frontage needed and dedicated at that time. So I think the $8,000 is or $4,000 if it was half, is a small price for the community to pay to help this infill and realize that we have potential in the future to acquire property that would be very significant in future road network improvements.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Thanks for the second opportunity. Just a quick question to staff then. If if we were to move this forward and if in the long run it were to be approved, would the on-site storm piece be part of a covenant of any kind?
Your worship, it sounds like if the variance is approved, they won't have to connect to the city storm sewer main, but the idea anyways is to have on-site stormwater retention systems, and those have to be designed by a geotechnical engineer, and sometimes a covenant is needed to protect an area for drainage on site.
So I guess it bears mentioning that something of that type could in fact cost more than just building the storm in the first place.
Your worship, there's a lot of other costs associated with subdivision that aren't outlined in this report.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jameson?
Thanks again, Your Worship. Really a question through you to engineering, and if the drainage, I guess it all depends on the drainage plan. Is there any concerns, because we might discuss, I don't know if it'll be a big part of our discussion at the end of the regular meeting here today, the information that we received on the report. Is there any concerns on a on-site drainage plan that would have any implication on overall drainage in that part of the of Lakeshore? Because I know that eventually we will talk about it, and I see that it's a low risk to a medium risk over long term on Area 4. So maybe.
Through your worship, this actually would be, I believe, Area 2. It's exceptionally high risk, and they've recommended that we don't introduce any more water into the ground in this area. So I think it's a pretty pertinent discussion in regards to this subdivision. However, the details, I'm not sure procedure-wise how we get into those details now.
Well, that's...
I personally would be concerned about on-site storm in this area at this time.
Okay.
I was hoping, we're just trying to pull up the topography here. In situations similar to this, we've somehow sometimes been able to get the roof leaders into the storm system where it is sitting a bit high, and then the foundation drains, which produce a lot less water, go into a rock pit. I'm not sure at this point if that's an option for here, but it depends on the siting of the house.
Okay, so I misread the map. Yeah, it is Area 2. Okay. Okay, thanks for those comments.
So thank you to council for all your consideration here. Also noting what Councillor Jamieson talked about that we're going to be speaking about later on, which may or may not make some changes when it comes to the actual council meeting. But for now, I will call the question, and all in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. So after we have our conversation about the storm drains, we may or may not see something different. So thank you. Administrator?
Your worship, the next item, 5.2, is variance permit 483 for the property at 611 Shuswap Street. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Harrison, seconded by Councillor Jamieson, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that VP 483 be authorized for issuance for Strata Plan 2956 to vary the provisions of zoning bylaw 2303 as follows. Reduce the minimum setback requirement of a principal building from the rear parcel line from 5 to 0.76 meters.
Thank you. Development Services?
Your worship, this application is a development variance permit proposal for the property located at 611 Shuswap Street Southwest. And this property is a site of the Greystone condominium, a 16-unit high-density development. And this building was developed back around 2006. It was approved for a development permit around 2004. And the idea at that time was for a two-phased strata. So another building, another similar looking condominium was proposed on the western lot. And with that strata plan, this property line here, which is the west rear lot line, would be erased. It would basically dissolve, and then it would all become one strata property. Quite a bit of time has passed, and in fact, the time to proceed with the strata expired a long time ago. And the owners of the remainder property, which is XL Construction Limited, represented by Rick Semenzen and Bill Laird, they would like to have this remainder completely separated from the strata. And right now it is. But in order to get out of the stratification and the obligation to proceed with phase 2, they need to actually go to the Supreme Court to get a decision on that. And one of the suggestions that I had before they go to the court is to seek a setback variance, because there's portions of the building that encroach into the 5-meter rear setback area. And they're shown on Appendix 3. And so that's why we're here today.
Okay, thank you. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, my name is Bill Laird. I live at 4185 5th Street Southeast. My partner Rick is with me here this morning, and I believe in your staff report you will see that the reduction is radical on paper, but not so much when you actually look at the situation, because where the cursor is right now on the drawing, that's actually a concrete workshop which is going to end up being below grade when the second building is developed. So I think it's pretty straightforward. The staff supports what we've requested, and the only issue is servicing the back lot. In the staff report, it talks about deficiencies, and the deficiency, as I understand it, is not in the size of the lines, because they were all designed by Gentech to support the second building, which is 24 units. That's the potential under the R5 zoning. So all the servicing is in place. It's just that it's not covered by an easement in a proper fashion, in my opinion. Now, I don't know where staff is at on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Laird. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Seeing none at this time. Okay, have a seat, thank you. Do we have any questions for staff? Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship. And so maybe through you and to Mr. Laird's question, is that something that needs to be put in place?
Your Worship, this application is strictly about the setback variance proposal.
So
the servicing is a separate matter, and our engineering department can speak to Mr. Laird on what's required there.
Okay, good. So that's another conversation another time after this. Okay, and just a comment, I agree with Mr. Laird's comment in that it's a radical on paper, and really in practicality it is a small variance. So I'll listen to any other discussion if it's warranted.
Okay, Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Yeah, I think I went and looked at it, and I think it's really straightforward. The property owner owns both properties, so I'll support the variance.
Thank you. Do we have anything further from council? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Administrator?
Your Worship, the next item is variance permit 484. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that VP 484 be authorized for issuance for Lot 11, Plan EPP 75660 to vary subdivision and development servicing bylaw number 4163 as follows. Waive the requirement to upgrade the north half of Outer Road Southeast to the interim urban arterial standard. Reduce the requirement for a cash contribution of the estimated cost of the required water main extension to a 50% cash contribution, waive the requirement for a cash contribution for the estimated costs for the required sanitary sewer main extension, and finally waive the requirement for a cash contribution of the estimated cost for the required storm sewer extension.
Development Services?
Your worship, this is another servicing variance application for a proposed one-lot subdivision on a very, very large lot located at 2281 Auto Road Southeast. And the property is owned by the Bowers, and the agent is Brown Johnson Land Surveyors. And the subdivision application is for a one-lot subdivision on the northern portion of this property. And that, like the previous application we talked about this morning, that triggers a whole bunch of works and servicing requirements of the servicing bylaw. This property definitely has further subdivision potential. There's an advanced street plan in your package which shows how Fifth will connect through in this manner. And there's another road, and it's related to the subdivision underway right now to the east. I think it's called Cherrywood or something. And that subdivision is well underway. Where they want to subdivide one lot at the northern portion, even that portion of property has potential for more than one lot, as you can see on the advanced street plan. And what we included here is a bit of a reference map to try and explain what is being requested here. First of all, the two lines shown in proposed Lot A, the red and the tan color line, are supposed to be storm and sanitary pipes, mains, extended basically from the northern portion of the property to about this point here to the remainder. And the applicants are requesting to not have to pay any money towards that. If I believe, yes, that's correct. They don't want to contribute towards those extensions. They're willing to contribute to a 50% contribution to extend the water main from the eastern boundary to the western boundary through the future road reserve covenant area. And staff do support that 50% contribution. If council was to grant the variance on the storm and the sanitary lines, that would mean in the future when somebody goes to subdivide the remainder here, they would have to pay 100% of those costs for that. So that's why staff is not supportive of that variance. I don't believe there would be any implications on the city to cough up money to help extend those mains. It would be strictly on the person that subdivides up the remainder in the future to pay 100% of those costs. But I'm just speculating on that at the moment. So that's pretty much all I have to say at this point to introduce what's going on here, and I believe the agent is here to explain things too.
Okay. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Good morning, Joe Johnson, 5460 40th Avenue Northwest. Your worship and councilors. You know, staff has covered off everything very well. I just wanted to make sure you understood that the services along the west boundary, the storm and the sanitary, we're not asking for those to be permanently varied. You know, they would be put in when the balance of the property was developed. The balance of the property, I believe, is 12 lots. We think it's fair that the development that's going to benefit from those services should pay for them. The lot that's being created, even if it is subdivided in the future into 3 lots, will not be making use of those storm and sanitary services. Those services run along the north boundary, and at that point, they'll hook into those services. So there's zero benefit, to the lot that's being created by those services.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Johnson? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, Joe. I'm not sure if my questions are for you or for Jack. I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about the future for those lots. I believe the can we go back to that other picture, because it really shows. Yeah, there. Could you just put the cursor where the house is presently, which is in remainder of lot 11 in the right-hand corner? Yeah, there. Could I ask what your intention is with proposed remainder of lot 11?
Just need your name and address, Mr. Bowers.
Jack Bowers, 2281 Otter Road Southeast. Basically, we have our current property listed with the understanding that when it sells, we'll subdivide off the front lot. So it's clearly stated in the PLA provided by the city officials here that what the cost would be for anybody when they buy our land and do wish to subdivide it. And so, as Joe Johnson said, certainly the covenant, or whatever way you want to word it, would be there if it's ever going to be subdivided. But we have no intention of subdividing the rest of the land, or subdividing any, except taking off a strip to build one house. And even though it has the potential of 3 lots, our intent is to only have one house there on the northwest corner of it. And so, as Joe clearly said, and if I can't speak, listening to the other speakers before, fortunately, it might be the first time I come to council for anything where there is absolutely no cost being requested from the city, from the engineering department, or anything at all. So I think it's fair. I think Joe did a good job working with the engineering staff here. Thank you.
Thanks for that answer. Yeah, I may be uncomfortable you're coming not asking for any money, Jack. So just kidding aside. That really helps. That was what I thought, but I just wanted to hear it and make sure I totally understood. Thank you, Worship.
Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. And
did you want to talk to Mr. Bowers too?
So, just so I'm clear, could we go back to the other map, staff, that was up a second ago? No, not that one. The city one of the property you just had on the screen until, no, the bigger. Back one more. Oh, maybe 2 more. No.
Not that.
No, you had the actual area with the big pieces of property without the made-up lots. It's the actual existing.
Oh, okay.
No, that one. Okay, so just to be clear, if you look up to the left of the 2 big properties, lot 8 across the road there is where I live, so I'm kind of familiar with this area. So just so I'm clear, there is a road that is planned at some point to go extend 4B to connect the 2 pieces. It's too bad Mr. Laird left, because lot 2 beside lot 11 is Mr. Laird's, and I don't think he intends to subdivide that. But if the Bowers' intent is to build on the piece they're splitting off, obviously they won't be allowed to build in the road reserve, or is there a road reserve?
Okay, Your Worship. So one road reserve is an extension of 4B.
Right.
Right here, it's 20 meters wide.
Yeah.
And the second road reserve, which Mr. Bowers has agreed to, is this connection.
Okay.
And I should also mention, I forgot that one of the variances being requested was along Ottawa Road. So the request is to waive all works and services required along Ottawa Road. And the covenant would say no further subdivision of the remainder until Ottawa Road is upgraded.
Okay. Okay, so the road reserves are there. So then that leads kind of to my next question to Mr. Johnson. I know you can't answer this, but that unequivocally, because it's asking you to make a decision on what might happen in the future, but in your professional opinion, that remainder property with the ability to put 12 lots, but knowing how much improvements will have to be done on Ottawa Road, is it still a viable potential development in the future?
I see no reason why it wouldn't be.
Okay, so even with the covenants and the breaking out of this property. Okay,
Maybe I could just add while I'm up here that, that the Bowers are providing all the statutory right-of-ways and covenants that are necessary to allow for future development.
okay, and so that line that they don't want to pay for now, which they don't need, there will be the covenant or the right-of-way there for any future development to extend that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have anything further from council? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, just one other question for Mr. Johnson. The access for Mr. Bowers, Ms. Bowers' house is going to come off the stub of 4B, is that right? For
That is correct. There's a temporary turnaround at the end of the dedicated road that the Bowers, will be taking on paving as part of this subdivision. And that's where they'll access the new house.
Okay. Yeah, I was up there yesterday, and so maybe you can answer one more question for me, Joe. And this property line looks like it shows it. It kind of comes down and it goes out a little bit, right? Is this drawing accurate? Because their present house is really close to that. Yeah, there's the jog right there. So is that how that property line goes?
Yeah, if Mr. Pearson could go to the subdivision sketch, it might show it a little clearer. Yeah, so that right-of-way that you see there that goes in 21.78 meters is the temporary turnaround with a hammerhead, going to the north to allow for turning around.
Going down in like that. Okay, thank you very much. Could I just ask staff one question?
Sure.
Can we just look at this is related, but it's for my interest too. Could we just look at the bigger picture that we looked at with Councillor Flynn? That includes Mr. Laird's lot. Actually, we can go back to where the house is, the one back. Yeah, because I'm just wondering about 4B. The way it's drawn, presently it's going to go through Mr. Laird's living room pretty well. So is it going to... Okay, just through his front window, maybe.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to redesign that at some time if that comes to fruition. Is that right?
It's unfortunate, yes, that the connection is somewhat obstructed by this house, and a redesign would be needed.
Okay, all right, that's what I thought. Okay, that's good. I'm ready for comments after questions.
Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper, and a question for the applicant as well. The staff has recommended a version of the requirement for the north side of Otto Road to include a covenant, and is the applicant comfortable with that staff recommendation?
Yes, I think the covenant is no further subdivision until the servicing is, met. And yes, my client is comfortable with that.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, then we have comments. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, I don't mind starting. So I will support the request of the applicant. I think it makes sense. The city's covered because until that south lot is developed, it's not financially viable to put in the services. But with 12 lots, then the water and storm extension can happen, and the improvements to Lakeshore Road as well on that north side could happen. So I think it's reasonable. It allows the Bowers to go ahead with their plans, which is to build a house on the smaller piece of the lot on a property they've owned for a long time. And hopefully the south lot will sell and someone will develop it and put 12 lots there. So I'll support the variances as requested with the covenant.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Yes, thank you, Worships, and I agree with Councillor Harrison's comments. I think it's been some interesting planning and discussions going on with this application, and I can see a benefit to the Bowers doing it this way, and also eliminating those upstream costs, but making future developers or future applicants know very well what the cost will be. So I think that's, there's certainly an appropriate way of doing it. And providing the right-of-ways is important. This part of town will develop. There's no doubt about that. And I can see maybe 5 to 10 years, but who knows? And but those roads, having the right-of-way really improves planning capabilities there, and hopefully, as like Councillor Harrison said, someone will purchase that subject property, and then further homes will go in with the roads and the services. So I will support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. I just want to be clear, because Councillor Harrison said he supports, but with the covenant, but the motion as presented that we're considering doesn't have the covenant. So do we need an amendment to that motion? Or are we going to defeat the motion for consideration and bring forward a new motion? I'd ask the Chief Administrative Officer, because I think Councillor Harrison added a covenant and was voting in favor of that, but we haven't added a covenant, I don't think.
Chief Administrative Officer?
Yes, an amendment would be required.
Okay. So I will amend the motion to the staff recommendation. I believe that handles everything that the applicant desires, but it protects the city if there's ever any future development of those 12 lots, then we will be able to get the improvements that we need at that time. And as I understand it, the application as amended would cover all of the statutory rights of way, road allowances, and everything that we need for the city.
Okay.
So I will make a motion to amend the motion to the staff recommendation.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Jameson. Okay.
Now, I might not have everything in there that Councillor Harrison intended, so.
Councillor Lavery, I have you up next, but did you wish to?
I'll pass that. I was going to make the same amendment.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So then to Councillor Harrison, you had a comment?
Yeah, so thank you. I think I agree with Councillor Flynn. I think he intended that staff recommendation 1 on the first page be included, but not the recommendation on page 2, because there's another piece to it, and we don't want that piece in there.
So that piece is the, that's why I thought I'm kind of, Councillor Harrison's intent and perhaps my motion's intent should be to just put the bottom piece, the covenant in, and not the staff recommendation for the 50%.
That's right.
So I'm okay with that being my amendment.
So Councillor Jameson, you're okay with that? Okay. Great. So then, speaking to the amendment, anyone wish to speak to that? Okay. So then the amendment to the motion, I'll call the question. All in favor? And then the motion as amended. Do we have anything further?
Just want to make sure staff knows what we did, because
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not exactly really succinct when it comes to amending motions.
Right. Did a good job, thank you. And I will call the question on the motion as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Administrator?
Your Worship, the next item is variance permit 485 for the property at 110 2nd Street Southeast. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Harrison, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that VP 485 be authorized for issuance for Lot 8, Plan 392 to vary zoning by Law 2303 as follows. Number 1, reduce the minimum setback from an interior side parcel line from 2 to 1.25 meters to allow for the siting of a detached suite. Number 2, reduce the minimum setback from a parcel line adjacent to a lane from 1.2 to 0.96 meters to allow for the siting of a detached suite. And number 3, reduce the minimum setback of a projected roof E from 0.6 to 0.1 meters for the detached suite as shown in Schedule A.
Development Services?
Your Worship, this is a property owned by Lee Fennell at 110 2nd Street Southeast. And Council will remember that just a week ago, there was a public hearing for this property, and third reading was granted to a bylaw to rezone the property from R1 to R8. for the purpose of allowing this accessory building in the backyard to be used as a detached suite. And so Mr. Fennell's also applied for this variance application to legalize the siting of the building that's been there since about 2004. And so the variances in the motion that was just read off would legalize the siting of this building for a detached suite.
So thank you for that. We have been dealing with this for a while, and it's moving through all of those steps that it has to move through. So thank you. And Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you. So Mr. Fennell has now hit the ball back into our court. So I will support the motion to move this forward and do our piece. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship, and through you to planning, I know we talked about it, and one letter, I believe, that we did receive for the public hearing suggested that there was aerial trespassing. There was a gutter or eaves that were over the property line, and I think you stated at the time that it was, we didn't think so. I'm just wondering, I just want some sort of...
Your Worship, so the site plan in your agenda shows the proposed detached suite as a garage, and this 0.96 is the distance of this corner of the building to the lane boundary. And so that's one of the variances being applied for to reduce that setback from 1.2 meters down to 0.96 meters. And the other variance being requested is for the roof eaves. And maybe one of the photographs shows that a bit better. There's the projection of the roof eaves, and they're within about 32 centimeters of the boundary of the lane.
That's close. Okay.
Chris Larson was out there with his measuring tape.
And we don't need a covenant for no toga parties, I guess. An inside joke, but okay. I just wanted that verification because I know we talked about it briefly at the last week at our public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anything further? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Administrator?
Your Worship, the next item is Development Permit 421 for the property at 131 Harbourfront Drive Northeast. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that DP 421 be authorized for issuance for Lot 2, Plan EPP 69106, in accordance with the drawings dated July 27, 2018, and that issuance be withheld subject to receipt of a letter of credit in the amount of $7,500 for the completion of associated landscaping.
Thank you. Director of Development Services?
Your Worship, this is a proposed form and character development permit application for the property located at 131 Harbourfront Drive Northeast beside the Prestige Inn, just directly on the west side of that property, where 3 multifamily buildings have recently been constructed by Mr. Marvin Skirpin, and he's applying for this this smaller piece of property zoned C6 tourist commercial zone to develop a 6-level 15-unit condominium building. And the proposal went through staff, it went through the design review panel. There's no variances being requested. This would be one of the tallest buildings down at the waterfront area at 19 meters in height. And the proposal meets the form and character development permit guidelines. There's minimal setbacks on this property with the zone that we have. And a lot of the landscaping around the site has been completed for the neighboring development underway. Not quite completed, but almost. And we just asked that Mr. Skirpin would provide a landscaping bond of $7,500 to address landscaping possibly. As you can see here, there's a lot of trees along the boulevard in this area, which makes the area very nice. And the city actually planted a lot of those trees in that area. And so we're hoping that we can plant some some boulevard trees along there. But we don't have the details of that. There's only about 1.5 feet of room between the sidewalk and the property line, so that's probably not wide enough for trees. We don't know yet. So there's some details with landscaping we'd like to figure out. But more importantly, this building is huge and it's nice, and we support it.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak? And just your name and address.
My name is Marvin Sherpin, and I live at number 11121 Harbourfront Drive, just across the street from this. So I think staff's done a good job. The report is there. MQN has done a good job in their reference letter. So really, I'd just be open to any questions you may have.
When can I move in? I shouldn't say that. I do support this. I think this is a beautiful building. So I will open it up for council. Do we have any questions for the developer? Councillor Jameson.
Thanks, Your Worship. And thanks, Marvin, for your application, and no variances, and everything zoned, and the previous development to the north is going along really well. In fact, I think there's people living in there now, in 2 of them, or?
They are, including myself. So.
Yeah, in all 4 units, or? The
first 2 buildings are occupied, and the other 3rd building will be occupied around Christmas.
Good. Okay. Just a timeline on this building for construction. What do you propose?
Our plan is to start in the spring, and of course it would be then occupied in early 2020.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Is this, Marvin, before you go, not that it really matters, but just so I understand, is this going to be considered the same housing development as the condos that are already built? Or is it going to have like the same name, or is it going to be separate?
Well, we're calling it the Shoreline Tower. It is actually separated by way of it will be a separate strata, and the access easements have already been created in the current development.
Okay.
In the subdivision that was done in the 2-lot subdivision.
Okay. I know there's no media and there's no gallery, but just for my interest and benefit, in light of all the conversation around a potential underpass, how much would the DCCs for this building be for the underpass reserve?
Your Worship, under the current DCC bylaw, the underpass is just listed like any other capital project.
Oh, okay. Yep. So this development does pay specifically to the underpass reserves.
All DCCs collected throughout the city.
Throughout the city. Okay. Okay. I like the development. I really like the ones that are already there. I may live in one of these at some point in the future, but I'm not going to declare a conflict of interest right now.
Thank you.
But I think this is a great example of extending our mixed-use development on that waterfront. And to me, what was developed back in the controversial days is an excellent mixed use of our waterfront, with a nature trust, park, and lots of really different development along there, from single-family homes to perhaps our tallest building. I think it's a great mixed use, and I'm guessing the people across the road might be a little upset, but they might be losing some views. But I like the looks of the development and will vote in support.
I don't think they're too upset, actually. Some of them are interested. So.
Moving across the road.
Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marvin. I too, like my colleagues, support this. And in fact, I talked to someone across the road there yesterday, and they said, we know this has been coming, and it's not unexpected, and we'll have an option to go there. I just want to push Councillor Flynn's question one step further, because I was having the same thought. What is the DCC amount that this will be collected from this development? Just approximately.
About 6,200 per unit.
I think if you rounded it, we carried a budget of around 110,000 for this, plus we've paid for the 12 units prior too. So rounded somewhere in about $200,000 range for the 24 or 25 units that are being developed.
Okay, that's really helpful for us to know, I think, because I don't think people recognize or understand that piece, which is a pretty important piece. I really like the look of the building, love the modern look with the wood and the stucco combo. So our design review panel just supported it, didn't have any changes that they suggested. So thank you very much. Hope it goes well.
Thank you.
Do we have anything further? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Administrator?
Your worship, the next item, 6.1, is provided for information, and the Director of Engineering can speak to it.
Your worship, so we've been dealing with Lakeshore Drive for many years now and having some slight slippage issues and cracking of the road surface. And so in 2017, we engaged Fletcher Payne and Associates, geotechnical engineers, to do some investigation on the road surface and what's underneath it. So essentially, they've worked between 10th Avenue and 20th Avenue, as the map shows, and they've identified 4 areas of potential concern. And so we've got Jen Wilson here, our city engineer, and she can elaborate on some of those specific areas.
Through your worship. So they drilled about 10 boreholes and took a good look at the groundwater and the soil conditions. They looked at, they prepared a safety factor using several different modeling options, so we're pretty confident in their results. Moving through Area 1, that's at 10th Avenue in Lakeshore. We've patched that recently. It kind of has a horseshoe failure. It bumps your car when you're going over it. They've categorized that as more of a nuisance than anything. It's a shallow failure. We'll be seeing it happening over and over, but for our purposes, it's maintenance. There are stabilizing options that we can do, quite expensive, so we'll have to just take a look to see whether it's cost-benefit analysis to see if it's worth doing the fixes or whether it's better just to do an ongoing maintenance program there. Area 2, they were not seeing a lot of groundwater in this area, but this is definitely the higher risk area. So this was a medium risk in the short term, high risk in the long term of catastrophic failure. So this is the greatest public safety risk along the study area here. They've recommended that rather immediately we do some tests to see if we can find any leaks in the water main, anything in the area, to make sure that we're minimizing any water going to this area. As it stands right now, the safety factor is 1, basically saying it's stable right now, but any changes to the ground conditions could risk failure here. So this is an area where we want to not be putting water into the ground, making sure our infrastructure is sound. So you'll be seeing some budget items coming forth in the 2019 budget proposal for doing some leak testing on our water main while we prepare for a much bigger project in this area. So Area 3, the safety factor was between 1.2 and 2, depending on the groundwater. There's a lot of groundwater in this area, which is funny, just it's not that far from Area 2, but the way the topography works, there's all of the groundwater comes to this area channelized. So this one, again, we can fix it, but it can be quite costly. So again, they're kind of saying it's more of a maintenance issue. We could continue to fix it, just patch it, put more granulars down and pave over it over and over and over again, or we can look at some anti-slip piles to stabilize it permanently. So again, that would be a cost-benefit analysis just to see what the best use of the taxpayer dollars are there. An Area 4 safety factor between 1.2 and 1.7, that's just as you go around the 90-degree turn, Lakeshore turns into 20th. It wasn't really any concern to them. It was over steep slopes, so you could put a little bit of a wall at the bottom to stabilize that slope. There's a house at the bottom though, so probably unlikely for us to do that, but it's not of great concern. So realistically, Area 2 is, we weren't seeing huge concerns. It's Area 3 and Area 1. I think everyone notices when you're driving your car, those are the areas we've been patching, but those in fact are the nuisance areas, whereas Area 2 is the safety concern. So again, we'll be coming forward with some budget numbers. They're They went through pretty much any stability options they could to see which ones would be realistic in these areas. It is incredibly steep off of Area 2, so there's not too much options. I think they were talking mesh and anchoring to kind of stabilize that slope. But while they were looking at it, their overall thought is that it would most likely be more inexpensive to move the roadway away from the slide zone. So to move it over to the east about 8 meters. So we are going to be budgeting for basically a cost-benefit analysis to see whether or not, what stabilization options are available to us, what the cost of those would be, the mesh and anchoring versus moving the roadway, the anti-slide barriers versus moving the roadway. There's a lot of issues with steep driveways off the east side that would maybe cause us to have to buy properties on that side to make that work. So at this point, we're just very unsure of what we can do here, but look for those budget items coming up in the 2019 budget.
Thank you.
Your Worship, just to add to that, so again, this is a timely report because of the GOM subdivision, and as mentioned earlier, we really don't want to have more groundwater introduced to these areas. So when subdivisions occur along Lakeshore, these will have to be taken into consideration. We've got a lot of work to do here, and it's pretty comprehensive, and it's going to be pretty costly at some point in the future, and maybe even the near future. So we need to advise council of that and make sure that that we're doing our work to prepare for those particular works that need to happen.
So thank you for this report. It gives us some things that we need to seriously consider, so we appreciate that. I see some of the councillors do have questions or comments, so Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the report. It's I'm not going to ask any really granular questions, just sort of big area questions, because the option for purchasing about 25 feet or acquiring 25 feet, and staff talked about driveways and, of course, location of houses and things. Anywhere in the discussion, is there a thought about narrowing the road, having single lane traffic? Like, has that been a part of any kind of discussion at all?
Director of Engineering?
Your Worship, we have talked about that. Unfortunately, this is a major arterial for the city. I mean, I don't think that it would be wise to narrow the road in any way. We need to maintain the capacity on this road. Okay.
Well, it sounds like it's been discussed at least. I know it hasn't been discussed at this table ever, for those reasons, because not only is it a major transportation network, it would probably be fairly unpopular. But I think when we're looking at options like that, I think we have to talk about everything. And so in the future, that I think needs to be at least a piece of the mix, because who knows, we might be forced, it might just give way and then you got no road there at all.
Your Worship, if I could just add to Councillor Harrison's comments there, we actually looked at putting a bypass road in at some point, and that would go right through the GOM's property, essentially. So there was lots of discussion going on about what if. Now, unfortunately, we would have to go through a road plan, an advanced road plan again for this area, but a lot of times, if you look at the strata, the Willow Cove strata, that was developed and it took away some of the connectability options that we have because of that strata. Now, there's also topography issues there as well, but so we have looked at a lot of different things. We even talked about anecdotally putting lights in and having it one way into town in the morning and one way out going. But unfortunately, those things really aren't realistic. This is a major road for the city. And it's very steep, and there's a lot of issues. So.
Okay, no, appreciate those comments and thoughts. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship. Couple of questions. Do we have anything on record of any other geotechnical along here? And
Through your
how
worship,
recent?
there's been several geotech reports done in this area over the years. There's been consistent failures again in kind of the area 3 and area 1, so they have studied those extensively. The geotech, Fletcher Payne Associates did this particular geotechnical report, and we did give them all the historical documents to review as part of this.
Did they comment, Your Worship, on is there a trend? Is it getting more risky out there, or is it I'm not sure if stabilized is the right word, but is there a trend here?
It depends on the groundwater. So it's kind of maintained its historical slipping here and there. But what they're seeing is, especially area 1 and 3, when the groundwater tables are high, that's when you're going to see those slippages. So I think everyone at the table is probably aware the last few years we've had very high water table in the spring. It's been causing slippages all over the place. This is just one of them.
Okay. Well, I know in my 10 years at this table, we've always had our fingers crossed that nothing catastrophic would happen, knowing that there are difficulties here. This kind of does map it out. I know that it's not on the study area. That road, as you go along Lakeshore and then you make that hard right that turns into 20th, that road used to go straight through, and it's been closed for quite a few years. And I walk along there sometimes. My son lives in the area, and there's places where it actually goes back, it goes the other way. Like, that is a really difficult and challenging piece of landscape there. So I know that wasn't part of the area, and we have closed that road, so kind of you don't have to walk very far and look very hard to see the challenges that come there. The other one was CPR. Are they part of the discussion? Are they amenable to talking about maybe their part in it? Because again, I'm not a scientist, and I'm just wondering that their 100-year use of this corridor, I would suggest, has at least some play in here.
Through your worship, it's definitely a consideration in any geotechnical work, because the vibrations that are caused by the trains, the more often they come, the longer they are, that causes consolidation issues. It's basically like a seismic concern. And they also just clear off their area by cutting into the toe slope. Every time it fails, they just remove the material, which then causes more stabilization issues. So it's a consideration every time you're doing a geotech report. We have had many conversations with CP over the years. Rob can probably comment better on those conversations than I can. But they're doing their business. They're just getting trains from side to side. This is our road and our problem.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper, and my comments actually echo some of the previous ones that have been made here. So thanks to staff for this. This is a good update. I'm looking forward to the next step, cost-benefit analysis of a very challenging geotech situation with one doesn't need to be too much of a scientist to worry about water tables and things like that. So we've known that for a long time. I think this is a good step in moving forward. I would, as it comes back to us, I am interested in an update of the status of CP on this, CP rail on this, because I do think trains are longer and faster and heavier, and there's that whole thing about the impact on that slope stability. But I also would ask staff to come back as well as an option about changing the status of that arterial roadway. I understand it's a main connector, but in my consideration, at least if I am at this table, that we need to look seriously at the cost-benefit analysis of changing the traffic pattern. And there are options for that. At this stage, and I respect staff's opinion on this, but I do not want to eliminate the possibility of changing that status and making it more of a local roadway. I think we do have some options. I'm not going to traffic engineer at this time, but I think that discussion needs to be part of the larger table discussion when we look at cost benefit. So thanks to staff for that. Thank you.
Do we have anything further from council? Okay. Hearing none, I want to thank council for all their comments. And and stating their concerns. And thank you to engineering staff for this report, and we'll just keep moving forward. We'll be seeing what it looks like in the 2019 budget. So thank you very much. Administrator?
So I have a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Jamieson, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting of October 15, 2018 be adjourned.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Welcome to everybody.
The housing hub is about to start.
Yes, the housing hub is about to start.